This. Where do you find yourself on the pecking order? It's a question to think about. Growing up on a farm, the pecking order was a real graphic reality for us. Chickens had a way of being able to express the pecking order by pecking. And it was gruesome what a group of chickens, docile chickens, could do to that one who found themselves at the bottom of the pecking order. Not a good place to be. If we saw it taking place, we would try to intercede and move that chicken to a safe place until it could recover. If not, to be that odd chicken out had to feel like a curse to be that one. Well, the curse of the pecking order, it also exists among people, doesn't it? We see it manifested in something called bullying today. As parents who raised both a boy and a girl, we found the pecking order worked quite differently. Boys settled matters on the fields and courts of athletic competition or just simply by wrestling and fighting until it was worked out. I'm still not clear on how girls settle it. What I do know is 3 boys can play well together. Whether it's football, where you need someone to throw the pass, someone to catch the pass, someone to defend the pass, or if it's a home run derby, where you need someone to pitch the ball, someone to hit the ball, someone to field the ball, they've worked it out. And then I got to thinking about it. Trios of guys are famous. So we're going to play on this cold winter morning a little game called The Three Amigos. Okay? The Three Amigos. Can any of you think of another group with a name like the Three somethings? Three Musketeers. What else? The Three Stooges. How many guys love the Three Stooges? How many women love the Three Stooges? Oh, there are a few. That's good. That's good. Any others? The Three Tenors. The Three Wise Men. I hadn't thought about that one. It's the first one we should have thought about, the Three Wise Men. There's a widely unviewed 2009 movie I found called The Three Idiots. Any others? Sue thought of one the other day that doesn't begin with the. She was pretty proud of herself. Da, 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 da. Oh, My Three Sons, you win the prize. Very good. Now, how about groups of 3 girls? They're sisters, the Lennon sisters. They're sisters. They have to love each other, okay? Somebody said Diana Ross and the Supremes to me. So that's the point, see? It's the three. It's Diana Ross and the Supremes. Gladys Knight didn't even bother with women. She just went with the Pips. I'm waiting. I can't find one. 3 girls in our household always seemed to be a recipe for disaster. Invariably, one girl would find herself at the bottom of the pecking order, 2 of them getting along well, one of them feeling like she wasn't needed or really worse, necessarily wanted. There were more times than I can count or even remember when Jessica would hit the front door crying about those other girls, how they were leaving her out. Andy loved the neighborhood gang. The neighborhood wasn't as kind to Jessica. She often felt the curse of being the outcast. Outcast is defined as someone who is rejected or discarded. It's someone who ends up on the outside looking in. Synonyms for outcast include exile, refugee, leper, my favorite, pariah. Some of you may be painfully aware of what that feels like. If that's the case, I am sorry. Incredible effort is expended trying to eliminate or at least limit bullying today. Bullying is the way the pecking order operates today. And it needs some brave people to be able to step in and say, hey, just cool it. Just stop it. It's not always the down and outer who's the outcast. We're going to be looking today at an outcast who has established his authority over almost everyone in his area. He imposed his will on, he dominated them, and in turn, they hated him and would have nothing to do with him. Zacchaeus discovered that the top of the pecking order isn't really a comfortable place either. Zacchaeus, if you grew up in church, you've been singing about this wee little man since you were a wee little child. He was an outcast in his hometown of Jericho. It wasn't because of his lack of physical size, it was because he was the biggest intimidator in town. He was the tax collector who imposed levies on his neighbors to pay taxes to the hated Roman occupiers. And he also charged an extra, excessively burdensome fee for himself, and as a result, he was an outcast, a hated outcast by all. Here's why he was so hated. When you go back into that ancient community and you find it was exactly that, it was a community. It was a place where when the day was done, you didn't drive your SUV into the driveway to pull into the garage and then put the garage door down for a night of entertainment watching Netflix. You didn't sit on the back deck or patio with a fenced-in yard where you kind of divided yourself off even more. You didn't do that. One of the things we liked about Minnesota when we got here, the lack of fences, separating the backyard from the neighbors' yards. We found that the backyard became a place where some of the best connections, backyard neighbors, backyard friends. Well, in Zacchaeus' world, living in community was kind of like that backyard scene here in Minnesota. Historians estimate that when Jesus lived on earth, that 98% of the people didn't know where their next meal was coming from. Think about that. 2% were ultra wealthy. 98% didn't know if they were really going to be able to get their next meal, and so they needed to live in close, connected community to just be able to make it. They lived together, they played together, they made decisions together. Zacchaeus grew up in that kind of community in a town called Jericho. Similar to the walls of Jericho that had once fallen down, Zacchaeus built some very large walls around himself when he made a fateful decision. Because the Romans controlled the region, they collected taxes by a method known as tax farming. They offered regions for collecting taxes to the highest bidder. Whoever offered the most money was offered the opportunity to demonstrate whether or not they could deliver on that bid to the Romans. And so Zacchaeus won the bid for the Jericho territory, turned his back on his own people so that he could tax them. He was a traitor. It was well known tax collectors didn't just make enough money to satisfy the Romans. It was common practice to take extra, usually lots of extra money and goods for oneself. Let me just play this out for you. Let's say I'm the tax farmer for the region called Central Minnesota. I have the authority to tax you. The second offering is going to be collected soon. I have the authority to tax you. And so I'm going to look at your possessions. I'm going to make an estimate of how much they're worth. So I see that you drive a 2015 Subaru. Has some pretty nice options on it. I checked the Roman tax tables. They value it at around $14,000. And so with a 10% tax required on it for you to drive it this next year, that works out to about $1,400. However, I'm the tax farmer here. I get to establish the worth of the car. It looks pretty nice to me. I think it's worth $25,000. And that means the 10% tax for the year is now $2,500. I send the Romans their $1,400, which leaves how much for me? $1,100 of your money is now in my pocket because I am the tax farmer. How do you feel about me? Don't tell me, even pretend here. I don't know if I want to know that. I don't care anyway because I am backed up by the Roman government and you can't mess with me, so I'm going to take my money and I'm going to enjoy my life on you. That's kind of the attitude. So now imagine the buzz one day as you're walking through Jericho and you hear the rumor that there's this man who's coming toward town. This isn't just any man. This man has been doing amazing things, and people are calling him a miracle worker. Some are claiming he's a prophet. There are even rumors that he is from the line of the great King David. And so everyone knows that life was at its best in Israel when David was king. There were no Romans. Everyone feared David. Israel was respected as a major power. People didn't mess with David. This person who is coming is rumored to be from the line of David, and he's coming to your town. And the story is, the buzz is, he's going to do away with the Romans. If you're Zacchaeus, it's not good news for your tax business. In those days, when someone important was coming to town, the people didn't wait for him to come into town. They went out to wait and to try to grab one of the best spots along the road, if they were putting up the rope line, to be right there on the rope where they could reach out and hopefully be able to touch or shake hands with this famous person. And that's where we find ourselves as we turn to the account in Luke 19. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. Take note of those words, passing through. Imagine the disappointment of people who are waiting when they find out that he is just going to pass through their town. He's not even going to stop for lunch. He is on his way to Jerusalem to keep his appointment with destiny. He still has 19 miles to go. He's just going to keep going. For a culture that's built on community and hospitality, it would be a huge, huge blow. They're curious about Jesus. They want to know who he is. They're probably hoping to see, maybe even experience a miracle, but he's just passing through. But there's a crowd who wants to see Jesus, but there's one person in particular who's singled out here, Zacchaeus. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. Growing up in Michigan with weather like this during the winter, I was always intrigued by the Rose Parade. Seeing a parade that grand in a place like Southern California on January 1st, during the deadest part of winter, it seemed magical. So when we moved to California, I thought I might actually go to the parade someday. And then reality took over. I'd been to parades, and I knew how difficult it was to find a good place to be able to see. I watched news accounts out of Southern California, people camping out for several nights along the parade route to get the best spots. There were even stories about fights when someone invaded what someone saw as their place. I decided television was a good way to see the Rose Parade. And what I find is, my view of the parade experience, I can read that back into Luke's account. That view says Zacchaeus had a problem with being able to see because he was short and he wasn't willing to camp out for a couple of nights. So he was just doing what he needed to do because he was a wee little man getting to where he might be able to see. I have to set that mental picture aside to see that there's another reason at work here for Zacchaeus to run ahead and climb up into a tree. We're talking here about a guy who's hated. You see, in that culture, any respectable man would have been entitled to be right on the rope, to be at the front, to be able to see. It wasn't like today where you would move aside and let the little kids through. The men were able to be in the prominent place. The problem is Zacchaeus is not a respectable male. The crowd wants nothing to do with him. He wants nothing to do with the crowd. So what does he do? He runs ahead to the other side of town where Jesus would be exiting the city. It's reasonable to assume that would have been on the outskirts of town. They didn't plant trees in town because trees are dirty. Think about that the next time you're raking. Trees were planted on the outskirts of town where people would go to enjoy the shade, kind of like a park. Knowing Jesus is passing through, Zacchaeus runs all the way through town and climbs up into a sycamore tree. Here's something else we need to know. In that time, men didn't run. It would have been considered shameful to run. Zacchaeus probably hasn't run since he moved from childhood into adulthood. But now he runs across town and he climbs up into a sycamore tree. And here's where the Bible is so incredible. We would say he climbed a tree or climbed up a tree. That's what this particular translation says. It leaves out the fact that there is a Greek preposition there, epi, that tells us that he climbed up into the tree. Sycamore trees were valued for their huge leaves, their dense foliage. I usually picture Zacchaeus, when he's finally climbed the tree, sitting on a limb, kind of with his legs dangling there where he can see. That's how the pictures are often there. This tells us that he has climbed up in and he has found a place to crawl out. He's got a view window, kind of like a sniper, where he's got a window through which he can see without being seen. And so finally, here comes Jesus with the crowd begging him to stay. And when Jesus reached that spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. Now, it doesn't say how Jesus saw him. Maybe it was his divine nature. Maybe there was an observant person who sees him and he points, look, up in the tree. No, not Superman, Zacchaeus. By whatever means, Jesus calls him, and he calls him by name. Now imagine you're in the crowd. You grew up with Zacchaeus. You now have a family. You're one of the 98%. You come to the end of the day, and when it's time to eat, your kids are looking at you with big, hungry eyes, and they're asking, what are we going to eat tonight? And night after night, you look back at them and say, there isn't that much. And as you're there looking up in the tree, you realize the reason you have to tell them that is because of that man who's sitting up in that tree, the man who has cheated you. He's the reason. This story, it's often treated with a playful spirit. It's actually deadly, serious business that's taking place here. Now remember, we're still just imagining right now. So as everything goes kind of into slow motion, you're looking up at him and the anger starts to boil inside of you. This guy, if it weren't for this guy, you're ready to yell at him when you feel a hand on your shoulder that stops you. And you turn and you look and it takes your breath away when you see whose hand is on your shoulder. It's Jesus. His look, and that's all it takes, his look tells you that he understands what you're going through. And it leaves you wondering what he's going to do next. And Jesus looks up into that tree. The crowd quiets, wanting to hear what he's going to say. What is he going to say to that scoundrel who is hiding up in the tree? And I wonder, what kind of thoughts were going through Zacchaeus' mind at that moment? That he's now been exposed, he's been busted, as their eyes meet. The Bible never tells us why Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus. He was curious. He may have been genuinely curious. He may have been open to what the teacher had to say. It may be he'd heard the rumors that this is the one who's going to end Roman rule. And if Roman rule ends, my tax business goes away, what's going to happen to me? It may be Zacchaeus wants to see the man who's going to be the reason for his doom. But in that moment, the crowd is waiting to hear what Jesus is going to say, and I have an idea of what they want Jesus to say. Come down here, Zacchaeus. You've cheated all these people. God is angry with you. I am upset with you. There are going to be consequences. Come down out of that tree right now. That's what I would want to hear, because I'm that kind of guy. Jesus' next words define the God that we worship and follow. Because Jesus doesn't say any of that. He says, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Wonder what kind of thoughts were going through the minds of the people now. Wait, what did he just say? I thought he was just passing through and now he's going to stay, but he's going to stay at his house? Does he know what kind of a guy Zacchaeus is? This man, he's no deliverer. He's supposed to get rid of the Romans, and now he's cozying up to this tax collector. Collusion. Jesus doesn't have to convince Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus comes down at once and welcomes him gladly. And with that, we no longer have to imagine what the crowd was thinking, because Luke tells us all the people saw this and began to mutter. They began to mutter, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner. And what we have here, grace strikes like a lightning bolt. There is hope for the outcast, because there is a God who looks at us and he says, come down out of that tree. I want to stay with you. In that culture, staying or eating with someone meant that you were accepting them. That's why in another place, Jesus tells the disciples to shake the dust off of their feet if they're not accepted in a place. Jesus accepts Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus accepts him. And in spite of everything Zacchaeus has done, Jesus extends the grace of God to him. He didn't do anything to earn it. All he did was run across town so he could climb up in a tree where he wouldn't be noticed. And now he receives the free gift of God's grace. The free gift of God's grace, however, it's not free to Jesus. I started to think about this, the cost to Jesus. Consider the sacrifice of what he did on that day. First of all, Jesus sacrifices his time. He was passing through. He has 19 miles left to go. He's on his way to fulfill his purpose for which he was sent to earth, and now he stops. Before he finishes what he was sent by God to do, this is still part of his mission. Zacchaeus is his mission. He loves Zacchaeus, and he will show him that love. I wonder, has someone done that for you along the way? Has somebody stopped and just given you their time? I think if we had time, we could tell many, many stories about people who have invested in us that way. I know for me, there were 3 professors who did that along the way. My Greek prof in college, my philosophy prof in college, the placement director in seminary. The first 2 helped me with extra credit academic projects that involved many, many hours of work on their part outside the classroom, outside of what they were paid to do. The other went beyond expectations first in getting us settled in seminary and then guiding us to our first ministry position. They did this because they cared. And so our second question here is this: are you doing the same for someone? I'm sure there's someone who's done that for you. Are you doing the same for someone else? In our culture where time is the most precious commodity, where are you investing your time? The stark reality is that lives don't change unless you invest time. Where are you invested? In whom are you investing? Jesus was willing to sacrifice his time. The second cost for Jesus, he sacrificed his reputation. He was the hero being cheered just moments before as he walked through town. Now he's being accused of being a friend of sinners. And Jesus takes all of that anger, he takes all of that bitterness that they have against that man in the tree, and he lets it slide onto himself. He shifts it there. It's this habit that Jesus had. He takes on the burdens of other people. Ultimately, he does this completely on the cross. He also did it daily through encounters like this one. There was a quarantined leper. There was a woman who was caught in adultery who's about to be stoned as punishment while the man goes free. There's a rejected woman who comes to the well every day for water when no one else is there because she is an outcast of outcasts. There's another tax collector that he's included among his disciples named Levi or Matthew. It's just in his DNA, in his godlike DNA, to do that for people. And so when we read Scripture, it's quite clear Jesus loves the outcast. He loves the poor. He loves the hurting. He loves the oppressed. In this account, we see that he even loves the oppressor. Think about it. He has come to Jericho's version of Bernie Madoff, or from people in this area, Tom Petters, and he puts his arm around him and he says, I want to stay at your place today. That is a reputation killer to do something like that. But Jesus did it. Third cost is this. Jesus sacrifices his pride. It's pretty clear he sacrificed his time and his reputation. This final sacrifice, I'd never truly seen before that he sacrifices his pride. So stay for this, just a moment with me on this one. When Jesus actually does what he says he wants to do and he stays with Zacchaeus at his house, he is acknowledging that Zacchaeus has something to give him in return. I find in my life there are times, I'll make it just about me, not about you. There are times when I think that I am going to help someone, and it can cause me to show up on the scene with an attitude of superiority. It may only be subconscious, but it still shows through. The other person needs help, and like a superhero, show up to save the day. Little, usually no thought given to what the other person may be able to do for me in return. Jesus always affirms the dignity in people. Jesus helps the woman at the well find water that she can drink and never be thirsty again. How does he do it? By asking her first for some water to drink. She came every day during the hottest part of the day to draw water because no one would have anything to do with her. She was an outcast. That's where she found herself. Now, if we wanted to help someone who needs water, how would we? Better, how would the church in general, the church at large, how would we provide help? We do something noble like be at home. The water delivery truck is going to show up at your house at 10 a.m. The delivery man will install the drinking water machine, and there'll be future deliveries of water that will be coming. You'll have water. Jesus doesn't do it that way. He shows up at the well, and he asks her, could I have a drink? And she affirms that she has something to offer to him. Having served in the Bay Area in an affluent church, I discovered early in ministry how God needed to work on the pride factor. When there were gatherings that brought pastors together from the area and we'd be talking, there'd be some of those inner city ministry guys who were there at the gatherings. And so it was this mix of pastors. My go-to question in those conversations always tended to be something like, how can we help you? How can we help you reach those people in the inner city? In a sharing time one day, one of those pastors told us how demeaning that question could be. He told us this: one of the best ways you can help us is by realizing how much we can help you. And I think anyone who has gone on a short-term missions trip, they understand what I'm saying there. We go thinking that we are going to help, and we return realizing how much we have really been the ones who have been helped by those people that we thought were so needy. Well, thankfully, Jesus didn't have my pride problem. He sacrificed his time, he sacrificed his reputation, and he sacrificed his pride to connect with Zacchaeus. Look at the response that came because of the grace that Jesus gave. Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. That's how people respond to genuine grace. Jesus then tells him, today, salvation has come to this house because this man too, and this had to get the people. This man too is a son of Abraham. This man who has been a traitor, this man who has betrayed and defrauded his neighbors, this man who has turned his back on the people, on his heritage, Jesus says he is just as much a Jew as the rest of the people who were there that day. He is a son of Abraham. Jesus reinstates him because Jesus knew exactly what Zacchaeus needed. And Jesus knows what you and I need too. With his closing words, he lets us know that what he gave to Zacchaeus, he'll also give to us. He does that because the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. And seeking the lost means that sometimes we have to set our pride aside. We have to let the reputation go to be able to find those who are lost. Zacchaeus now finds himself in the found group. Jesus looks at this wealthy, influential man and he says, he was lost, he is now found. Grace is risky for Jesus. It was costly for him. He sacrifices his time, his reputation, and his pride. It prompts this incredible response from Zacchaeus. What's the result of this? Grace does something else that we may not notice just by reading these 10 verses. We have to put our imaginations back to work again. The next morning, Jesus is going to wake up and he's going to walk out of town. When he walks out of town, what's it going to be like? There's not going to be the party that was taking place the day before. There are likely some whispers, there's some grumbling, there may be anger. Glad he's finally getting out of town, as he leaves as an outcast. The incredible irony, however, is this, that those people who are grumbling about Jesus are now going to be able to go home at night, and when they sit down to eat, they're going to look into the hungry eyes of their children as they ask, what is there to eat? And they're going to have an answer. They're going to be able to say, thanks to Zacchaeus, we have food to eat tonight. I don't know what came over that man, but it's making it possible for us to eat tonight. He is a changed man. I really think something like that could have happened. Kind of gives me goosebumps. They're actually God bumps at how God works when he moves in the lives of people. And so for us here today, just a couple of questions in closing. Question 1, where do you feel like an outcast? Where do you feel like you're on the outside looking in? If you find yourself in that place today, it's not a fun place to be. We want church to be a place where you can come and not feel like you're one of those who are out there, outside looking in. God's grace is for everyone. We're all outcasts. Stop trying to hide. Turn to him and let him work his work of grace in your life. That's the first question. Question 2, where is God calling you to show this kind of grace to someone else? Where is God calling you, calling us, calling me, sacrifice your time, your reputation, your pride? We were never promised that the way of Jesus would be easy. He came into Jericho one way. He left quite the other. He left Jericho ready to head to Jerusalem, where he would walk into Jerusalem one way. And he would leave Jerusalem quite another way as he continued to make those kinds of sacrifices, that the grace of God might be upon people and make that kind of change of life. The life of Jesus isn't easy, but it is a remarkable and a worthwhile adventure that I invite you to go on together as this place known as Discovery Church. Let's pray. I am so grateful, Father, for your amazing, amazing grace. Thank you for sending Jesus. Thank you for sending Jesus to show what it really means to live a life of grace. Because instead of scolding that man in the tree, you loved him. You changed him. And that made all the difference in the world. Motivate us to do that. Chip away whatever holds us back, whether it's time, reputation, or pride. Help us to walk your way, Jesus. Help us to live the way you lived. Help us to love the way that you loved. We want to do that for the glory of your name, Jesus. Amen.